Burning Down the Ozarks by Baron Fist. Another day, another dollar towards beer money, I thought as I pulled into the company parking lot, and as I walked in the office, I heard a gruff, deep voice of my manager, Jerry, say, "Hey, Bub, you're going out of the area today." Out of area, obviously meaning that I was going to have to drive into the middle of nowhere, get maybe one job done, then have to be back here by sundown. As I was pondering my shit situation, Jerry walked up to me and slapped me on the back, kind of like a mildly alcoholic dad who doesn't know the meaning of too hard, and said, "You hear me, Bobby? Yeah, I'm making less money for the good of the company, right?" Jerry's brow furrowed. The sarcasm in my voice was almost beyond his grasp, but he eventually got it. "Listen here, you little ass clown. The company will pay double for your gas, will take into account the drive for your bonus, and give you free service on your truck. They treat us good if you do good by them." Jerry, a portly, balding, middle-aged middle manager, gave the same speech in the same tone every time anyone complained about having to do extra. Of course, though, I had to ask him why the heck he wanted it done today. Because Roger, referring to the guy who normally worked in our northernmost tip of the area, he decided that he hated you and called off this morning. "Yeah, but why am I the one who has to take his work?" Mildly surprised of Jerry's own sarcasm. "Because I think you're a limp-dick little asshole who needs to learn some work ethic. And don't go talking about how you served in the Marines and you work so hard, blah, blah, blah. I fought in the Gulf under General H. Norman Spetsikoff, and I know hard work. People like you turn the Corps into a bunch of pussies." Jerry, if you hadn't noticed, was a Marine like myself. But he served in the Marines before the time of the pussy generation, as he so eloquently dubbed millennials. But to be honest, he was just a warehouse manager, like he is now. While I was in the Corps, I was dodging pissed-off Taliban snipers and IEDs. So fuck him. I know, Jerry. I'm a pussy because I actually wore body armor. But anywho, before we start a dick measuring contest, where the hell am I going? I asked, trying to avoid our normal arguments. Jerry sighed and said, "Out in the Ozarks, near Grand Gap." Grand Gap. Literally a post office and general store smack dab in the middle of the fucking forest. The place is on a side road driveway that goes about 2 miles off AR-7. The customer needs 2 rooms done and a satellite dish set up. Jerry finished. He sounded like he may have felt bad because he knew how much I hated setting up those dishes. And, on top of that, the chances of us actually getting a signal for the satellite was little to none. So I'm driving 120 miles into the mountains so I can tell some backwoods inbred that I can't get his TV because of all the trees? Man, I must have been a murderer in a past life, I complained. And yes, Jerry, I frickin' know. I'll be compensated regardless. A couple of minutes later, I loaded up my truck and started the long trip north into the mountains, and away from the safety of familiarity. I knew the drive would take well over an hour and a half, and it was on relatively empty roads. So I started to let my mind wander. I've been with cable, satellites, and more for about 2 years now, and it still amazes me that I haven't quit and or killed myself yet. The hours suck, the pay is subpar, and upper management spends most of their time on their knees, sucking off the big corporations, just begging for scraps. Now you may be asking yourself, how did a combat veteran with access to a GI Bill and 4 years of leadership training end up installing cable in Arkansas? Well, the best way to answer that is, instead of taking classes and getting a skilled labor job, I wanted to be a badass. At 18, I only wanted one gig, the infantry. It gives you the ability to act under pressure, and you learn how to lead men into combat. But when you get out, most jobs want people with applicable skills. So, I tried college. A state school filled with former professionals turned professors. Expansive libraries brimming with knowledge and information. Companies from all over the world recruiting to pick the best of the candidates. Oh, and girls. Lots of girls. Now, I probably don't have to tell you, but I only paid attention to the last one. See, when you spend 4 years of your life surrounded by dudes, a plethora of chicks in yoga pants kinda distract you. And seriously, being the only non-bearded, non-vaping alpha male on campus got me laid. A lot. Like, I'm talking, Ron Jeremy's hairy ass would be jealous of me. Well, for my frequency of fornication, not my GPA. But shit happens, and I got this gig while I was directionless. Directionless, by the way, is the word used to describe me by my court of appointed therapists. I'll leave most of the details out, but some punk bitch decided to tell me not to sleep with his girlfriend while I was at state. I decided him eating my fist would be the best way to convey my feeling of distaste for his sentiment. One thing led to another, and now I have to see a shrink for my PTSD. PTSD my ass. I liked what I did over there. Get up, go on patrol, possibly shoot some Hajis, then go back to FOB. Simple. Now, life is complicated. I gotta pay rent, I have to be politically correct, and I can't shoot anyone. Even people who drive slowly in the left fucking lane. Well, maybe. Maybe I'll be lucky and whoever the customer is will be some super hot art student staying at her parents' cabin for winter break. She'll come to the door half naked and take one look at my manly frame, hopefully ignoring the pudge hanging over my belt, and invite me in to keep her warm for the winter. I let my thoughts wander, wondering about the pretty blonde. Nah, maybe brunette, waiting for me. Looking back, I really wish that was the case. As I got closer to the address, the GPS on my phone started acting a bit finicky, but it was able to steer me to the right driveway. Well, driveway was a word. It was more or less an old path shrouded by old-as-hell white oak and cottonwood. I heard leaves crunch and pines crinkle under the weight of my truck as I steered down the narrow track. As I drove deeper, I noticed that part of the forest was dense and had barely been touched. See, I went camping in the Ozarks every year with my dad up until I was like 17. Almost everywhere we went in the woods, you could tell it was affected by humans in some way. You know, a random piece of trash, carved initials of young lovers, tire or human tracks, and all that shit. These trees, this path, everything it encompassed seemed unscathed, even though someone apparently lived out here. It was strange to say the least, especially because there seemed to be no tire tracks going up the driveway. The path dragged on, and it seemed to narrow to the point where I didn't think my truck could fit on it much longer. I saw a patch of brighter earth and it opened up about 100 yards ahead of me. I silently thanked the man upstairs that I wouldn't have to lug my equipment through the woods. As I started to approach the opening, I caught the first glimpse of the house, or better yet, shit pile I'd be working on today. It stood, well, slumped, at around 2 stories, with rotted wood siding and maybe 2 out of 10 windows not smashed in. The front lawn was dirt, leaves, and pines scattered around. I couldn't fucking believe my eyes. How am I supposed to install TV boxes when there's not even power, I thought. It's probably some redneck with a fucking makeshift wind turbine strapped to a tree. Probably gonna ask why he can't get his NASCAR. I scanned for the front door, and I saw a plank covering the largest of the house's orifice. I decided that that would be my best bet as a front door. At this point, I was honestly just hoping that no one was home. There was no car and everything was overrun, and there couldn't possibly be a decent source of power anywhere on this property. But God was definitely not on my side that day. As I approached the front door, I saw movement behind one of the non-smashed-in windows. I may have seen some shit overseas, but someone actually living out here in this busted house couldn't be someone I wanted to spend time alone with. But if I didn't at least try to get the job done, I wouldn't get paid any bonus. As I arrived to the plank/door, I slowly reached my hand up to knock, but before I could reach, it swung open. Behind the door was a person, or at least what was left of a person after spending a few months at a concentration camp. The guy stood at least 6 feet tall and no more than 100 pounds. He was white as a ghost and seemed to be made of only bones and thinly stretched skin. He looked like someone sucked all the fat and sinew out of his body. But the creepiest part were his eyes. They seemed, empty. The pupils were so expansive that I couldn't make out any color and barely see the whites. I realized that I had been staring and looked down at my paperwork. "Good morning, sir. Is this the residence of a Mr. Vitter?" I barely got it out before he opened up that black hole that was his mouth. "Why have you come?" His words rolled off his tongue, heavily laden with a thick, syrupy Scandinavian accent. I could barely even respond. Here I was trying to install satellite for Count Dracula. He doesn't ask me what I want or who I am, but why have I come? Who the hell says that? I'm your cable technician, here to get your TVs all set up, I stammered. It was all I could think of with this pitch-black eye staring right through me. He continued to stare for what felt like an hour until he opened up his whole face. "Oh, yes, come forth into my home. I will show you where you will be working, but be warned, I do not like anything in my home touched. Your business here is television only. Is that understood?" This fucking guy looks like Skeletor and sounds like a James Bond villain, I thought. Aloud I said, "Yes, sir. I won't touch any of your stuff, knickknacks, or personals. Just want to set up the TVs and head back to Little Rock." He stared at me for a second before he turned into the dark house, beckoning me to follow. As I trailed my gaunt host into the ramshackle house, I couldn't help but notice the nauseating scent of decaying meat, mixed with a tinge of rusted copper. It was as if I wandered into an abandoned slaughterhouse and I could smell the years of blood and decomposition of millions of animal parts. Don't think like that, man. The guy's probably a hunter. He lives off the grid and finally decided that he missed ESPN and called us up, I thought. But the smell wasn't the only off-putting characteristic of Mr. Vitter's home. It was the decor, or lack thereof. The front door opened into what barely could be described as a living room. The only sign that an actual human lived there was a decrepit rocking chair that looked like it was the sole survivor of Dresden. The wood had been badly scorched, and the only parts that weren't burned were heavily frayed. I felt like if I sat down in it, I would be pulling thousands of splinters out of my ass and wiping flecks of charred dirt off my pants for eternity. I took my eyes off the chair and finally saw the TV I'd be connecting the receiver to. Well, I say TV sarcastically because I'm pretty sure the set I grew up with 29 more years ago was more advanced. I saw the ancient beast still had the original wood paneling and everything. I hope to God that I have some kind of adapter in the back of the truck because no way I was telling Dr. Frankenstein that I didn't have the parts. Now, this is the first television. It's a Zenith from 1949. I was told your company specialized in connecting New Age media to these types of old sets. Am I correct? Mr. Vitter turned and looked at me with his empty eyes as he asked this. Should be. I can always figure it out. I lied. The oldest TV I ever set up was from the 90s. I am so fucked, I thought. I'm gonna punch that punk bitch Roger right in his fucking throat when I see him. Motherfucker better buy me a beer for calling out. Good. I would be very disappointed if I don't have my shows. Vitter, I think, smiled as he put an emphasis on very. He let me pause in the living room to assess the back of the TV. One look was really all I needed. One look told me that I was utterly fucked. This TV didn't have a single connection I recognized. But I had an idea. The job description I received from Mr. Vitter stated that he didn't want satellite on the roof. He wanted it on a pole. And from my experiences with these types of mounts, there was a high chance that this guy wouldn't get any kind of signal. Or the ground ain't right for a mount. All I had to do was take my satellite reader and pretend that there wasn't a trace of a signal. Oh, and I forgot to mention, explain to this guy he wasn't going to get his shows until my manager came out and verified. Fuck it. Jerry can die for the company he loves. I'll get over it. As soon as my spirit started to lighten and my mood turned from depressed and terrified into less depressed and slightly less terrified, my customer decided that I was staring at his TV for too long. I will lead you to the next TV. Hopefully the next one won't take so long for you to study. He sounded pissed, so I gave him the go-ahead to bring me further into this creepy-ass house. So I saw the power outlet behind the TV, but there are no power lines to the house. Is there a generator connected somewhere? I had to ask because I didn't hear the loud hum of a generator, nor did I see any sign of power being run to the house. My host turned and looked at me with his vacant eyes and hissed, How my home works is no concern for you. As he said this, I could see what little blood this guy had rush into his face. He was angry and seemed barely able to contain it. He turned back around and started heading further and faster toward the back of the house. I was about to apologize and fought to keep up with him, but something caught my eye. It was a picture on the wall. It was one of those old-timey portraits that you see in people's grandparents' house. I could only take a quick look, but from what I could tell, it was in black and white. One of the men in the portrait looked exactly like Mr. Vitter, like to a T. The only difference was the guy in the picture had normal eyes and didn't look so disproportionate. It couldn't be him. This picture had to be from the 1880s or something. Vitter stopped abruptly before I could finish studying the picture, and pointed toward an open doorway to our right. He said, "This is where the last TV is, and it's exactly like the first one. Do you need to stare at it incessantly, or will the information I have given you be enough?" As he asked this, I could literally feel the sarcasm and frustration pouring out of him. What the fuck is this guy's problem, I thought, then said aloud with a forced smile, "Just knowing the type and location would be enough for me." The weirdo seemed satisfied with my answer, and he took me a bit further to a back door flanked with 2 busted-out windows. He opened up the door and walked through them to the backyard, which was equally as disheveled as the front. "Okay, sir. I know you want a satellite somewhere in the yard, so I'm going to go ahead and try to find a signal. I'll knock and come to the door when I do." He looked at me and said, "I will stay outside. You seem young, and I generally do not trust the young." How the fuck are you supposed to even respond to that? I looked over at Mr. Creepy and said, "Okay, this is kind of boring, but feel free to watch." No other way to follow somebody telling you that he doesn't trust you. Well, who could blame him? I was planning on saying there was no signal, even if there was one, and just going home. As I started wandering around the yard, hitting random buttons on my signal finder, to further help my goal of pretending to find a signal, I was able to take in more of my host. His eyes and ugly-ass face kept me from looking at whatever he was wearing. His clothing looked as worn as he did. His long black coat was covered in Irish pennants, and his white button-up shirt was slathered in old stains. Jesus. This guy is all sorts of fucked up, I thought, as I wandered around the yard. I also noticed that something else was a bit suspect. Every 3 to 5 yards or so, there seemed to be little holes recently covered up. It looked like he was planting a garden or maybe some trees. I would have asked, but he was clearly not much of a conversationalist. After about 10 minutes of drifting around and hitting random buttons, my host's eyes never left me. I decided it was now or never to tell him I had no signal. Sir, I hate to say this, but due to the trees in the area, I have no line to your provider satellite. The only option would be to remove some of this foliage." I could barely finish the statement before the anger flashed in his big dead eyes and the blood rushed to his face again. "You will not touch any of my trees. They are precious to me." As he screamed, he closed the 10-yard gap between us in like 3 steps. "And you will give me my shows." He was so close to me by this point that the lifeless holes in his face were mere centimeters away. Okay. This was my final fucking straw with this goddamn psycho. But, alas, I would lose my gig if I blew up on one more customer. So, I took a deep breath, and I said in my best customer service voice, "I understand you're upset, sir, but I think the best way to resolve this dilemma is to get my manager out here." To myself, I was thinking, fuck Jerry. Let's see how tough his old core is when he meets this crazy motherfucker. As I said this, Vitter seemed to settle down a little bit, and the blood stopped pooling in his face. "Very well. But you must know I care very deeply for my forest. You mustn't harm it in any way," he said, still containing a hint of anger in his face. "What needs to be done next?" "Well, I need to get the proper forms for you to sign and I can go ahead and call Jerry, my manager, and not to worry about the trees. We won't touch him," I said, trying not to smirk. "Is this Jerry as insolent and as unconcerned about my forest as you?" he asked with heavy disdain. I looked up at him, trying with all my might not to look pissed off, and said, only slightly sarcastically I might add, "Not at all. He is a perfect gentleman and he loves trees. I mean, the guy has like 12 in his backyard." Somehow, this satisfied the tree-loving psycho. "Okay, well, I'm going to run over to my truck and get the forms. Want me to meet you inside?" I asked, hoping he would say no and I wouldn't have to go through that terrifying place again. "No, I will be out here, waiting." As he said this, he seemed to root himself in the spot that he was standing, like his trees, and remained unmoving. I took this as my sign to get the fuck back to the truck and get Jerry's fat ass out here. Not wanting to go through that creepy ass house again, I took the long way around the side and then back to the safety of my waiting truck. As I passed the house, I saw something that caught my eye. A massive painting was hung on the wall, possibly being the only object that wasn't completely dilapidated, but still very creepy. The painting was of this massive tree, but it looked like the branches ended with a human head and no eyes and were dripping blood. But the trunk of the tree decided it had to outdo the branches in the most fucked up contest ever. The trunk was kinda shaped like a man whose legs were firmly rooted into the ground. Its body stood as straight as an arrow and its arms were held out up in the air, turning into aforementioned branches. But the face of the trunk man took the cake for the macabre challenge. The mouth was locked into a permanent scream, spewing rivulets of blood that pooled at the tree's roots. The eyes were open, seemingly fixated on the branches above, as if in a trance with the gore-stained scene going on above its head. "What the fuck?" I mumbled to myself. "If you were smart, Bobby, you would leave." But alas, I'm a dumb redneck grunt from Little Rock and I refused to leave until the paperwork was signed. I had bills to pay. So I decided to ignore the massive evidence that this place was probably not too safe and continued on to my truck. As I approached my truck, I noticed that it looked significantly lower. Now before you ask, yes, my truck was lifted and I may or may not be compensating for something. Regardless of my inadequacies, as I got closer, I saw that my two front tires had gone flat. I said out loud to myself, "Fuck me sideways. How the fuck? Fuck!" I very nearly screamed the last fuck, but I kept it down so I wouldn't have to deal with Vitter. I walked over to my now useless vehicle and inspected the tires. And when I realized what had happened, I silently cursed myself. Since I was so busy trying to avoid lugging equipment around, I hadn't noticed that I parked directly on an upraised tree root. Fuck. Now, I not only had to make Jerry come here, but I'd need him to pick me up some spares. He was gonna be pissed. I took one more look at the depressing sight that was my 24-inch custom tires and opened up the front cab. I started fumbling around with my little folder filled with different types of paperwork until I found the right documents. Thankfully, I had one copy left. First good news of the fucking day. Shitty part of the no signal process is that you need the customer to verbally confirm with the manager that they want the site issue confirmed. Don't ask me why. Probably some legal horseshit. I started my way back to the yard, but this time I took the side that didn't have the creepy-ass painting on it. As I arrived in the backyard, I couldn't help but notice the absence of Mr. Vitter. Shit, I muttered to myself. I headed towards where he was last standing. Maybe he was taking a leak behind one of his precious trees, and God knows there was no plumbing in that horror show of a house. I made my way toward the end of the yard, carefully avoiding the little mounds that had been freshly dug, and I started scanning the tree line. After about 30 seconds, I started to turn away and make my way to the front door, hoping that he didn't want me to come inside. But as I was turning, I caught a glimpse of something black and billowing about 100 yards away in the woods. I moved a bit closer to the object and further away from the house, and I could sort of make out what the object was. It was Vitter's jacket. As I took a closer look, I saw a black boot that was only a few feet from where I was standing, and then another roughly 30 yards past that. Did this guy just strip down and wander into the woods? Well, this is it, the weirdest fucking day of my life. Now, you may be thinking, why didn't I just book it and flag down the first car that I saw and get the hell out of Dodge? The answer is, I'm an idiot, and I'm curious about nature. Also, I couldn't just leave the job. It would apparently jeopardize the trust between my small company and the big ones that we contract for. My next step would be to call Jerry and figure out what the fuck I needed to do. I pulled up my phone and hit Jerry's number. As I waited for that familiar gruff voice to ask, "What the fuck do you want?" The phone cut off. I looked down at my screen and saw the dreaded "call was lost" tag pop up on the front of my screen. Fuck me right in the goddamn ass. I tried again. This time it wouldn't even ring once. I wandered around the backyard hoping to find a stronger signal somewhere. When I finally gave up, my efforts were fruitless. It dawned on me that Jerry was with one of our new guys up near the mountain view, about 100 miles east of where I was, and a good 2-hour drive. On top of that, the cell service may have even been worse out there. Shit. There was no other manager in today. Even if I got service, they wouldn't pick up. My only option was to call the dispatch for the satellite company. The folks over there had zero sympathy for us not completing a job that was given to us, but having someone to at least be aware of my situation might stop me from being canned. I made my way up to the front yard and thankfully found a single bar of service. Just in case, I tried Jerry again, but nada. I started scrolling through my contact list and found the number I was looking for. It started ringing. Thank God for small miracles. And thankfully, I heard a pleasant female voice. "Thank you for calling Northern Star, #1 satellite service provider in North America. How can I assist you today?" Wow. All this time saying I gotta call someone and I had no idea what to tell them. Hi. I'm a contractor out of Little Rock, and I have a bit of an issue with my current appointment. I waited for a moment and I heard the lady sigh and then say in an annoyed voice, "Have you tried calling your manager?" These heartless fucking bastards. I needed a small amount of assistance, and it was too much of a problem to take a fucking call. SOP dictates that you talk to your manager before calling us. I've heard it 150 times. I wanted to say, "Well, you bitch, he has no service. I barely got this call going." But instead, I tried a more diplomatic approach. "I apologize, I know this isn't standard, but I can't reach my boss, he's out of service." I waited, praying that she would have some sympathy in her heart. "Okay, sir, I'll transfer you to your dispatch in the area. Prepare to hold." And just like that, I was sitting there in the middle of nowhere listening to the soft melodies of Loggins and Manessa while I waited for the dispatcher. The music abruptly stopped and I heard an equally pleasant yet male voice on the other end. "This is Jack. Heard you got a problem out there in Little Rock." Thank God this guy wasn't a dick. "Hey Jack, I got some weird stuff out here. Definitely nowhere near Little Rock. I'm up in the Ozarks, deep down in the backwoods. I'm stuck with an MIA customer." I blurted out. "Ah shit, the job number. Here it is. 306742. I heard Jack typing away at his keyboard, and a few mouse clicks later he said, "Okay, a Mr. Vitter. Oh yeah, he is totally out of your work area. How did you end up out there?" Fucking call out, man. I realized that these phone calls might be monitored, and I should probably ease up on the cussing. "Okay, so you said he was MIA. Like, he isn't home?" "No, Jack. I went to my truck to grab some stuff, and I came back and the guy was just gone. The weirdest part, though, I saw a trail of his clothes leading into the forest." "Like, his clothes?" "Yeah, man, his clothes. From what I could see, it was his jackets and both of his boots. Even I was starting to think that it was made up. There's no way that this guy believed me." "Well, I'm looking through your notes here, and there is not a single thing in SOP explaining what to do if a customer wanders off into the woods naked. But I am pulling up some satellite images of the area, and I do see a small pond formation about half a kilometer from his house. Maybe he went swimming." He said this, and I could hear him stifling a laugh. "Look, I know it sounds crazy, but there's a whole bunch of creepy-ass stuff going on around here. This guy is terrifying looking, and the house is barren except for an almost 70-year-old Zenith and a ratty-ass rocking chair, not to mention the painting." I replied. I heard the frustration in my own voice. "Painting?" Jack asked. Either moved by my tirade or trying to avoid a confrontation with the crazy person, I couldn't tell, but he definitely sounded less lighthearted. After I gave him a brief description of the picture, what the guy looked like, and even the little mounds, for a fleeting moment, he was silent. "Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but as long as he wasn't a danger to you or under the influence, you're gonna need that paperwork signed," Jack said matter-of-factly. But to me, that would be absurd. This whole situation sounds crazier than a group of shithouse rats, and I think you should probably just call it a day. I mean, I wouldn't want to be there, and I'm sure your company would let it slide if you said that you felt uncomfortable. I like this guy. He didn't state the guidelines and hang up. He reacted in a logical manner and said something a non-office drone would say. I never thought I would meet a company man who thinks like an actual person. Well, I'd say that solution would cover the rest of my problems, but I got another issue. My 2 front tires are blown out and I only got 1 spare, I said, hearing the defeat in my own voice. Yeah, don't worry about it. I'll contact the local... As Jack was about to offer me salvation from this mess, I heard a high-pitched scream. It sounded like a woman coming from out in the forest. Last time I heard a scream like that was some civilian Afghani found her kid torn to shreds by an IED. Bobby? Are you alright? What was that? I could hear Jack, but my senses were dialed up to a 10, and I could feel goosebumps forming on my skin. Bobby, did you hear me? What the fuck was that? Jack asked again. This time I answered. Some lady screaming bloody murder right in the goddamn direction that weirdo walked in, I whispered, trying to keep myself unnoticed. Jack, my mind's telling me to run down this driveway and not to look back. But if I leave some woman out there to some horrible fate, I'll hate myself for it. Bobby, everything about this place seems horrifying, and it's gotta be a neighbor or something. I cut Jack off. Man, you got the sad images. There ain't a fucking person out here except for Crazy Eyes. He hadn't upstairs. He could be keeping some chick up there for all we know. And the minute I left, he grabbed her and took her out to the woods to... I couldn't even finish the sentence. I was already all nerves, and thinking of someone getting killed or worse just might put me over the edge. Jack, by the time the cops get out here, if someone's getting hurt, I think I might need to go out there. I couldn't hear Jack on the other end. He was contemplating what I said. If you're dead set on wandering off into the woods and confronting whatever is out there, go grab your Bluetooth and bring me along for the ride. I'll try to call the local PD on the other end, Jack said. I honestly thought he would at least try to stop me. Okay, Jack, let me go get some stuff from my truck, I responded. Thankfully, I wouldn't be alone. I made my way again to my truck and reached under the seat and grabbed my piece. Called me a bandwagoner, but I do love me a Glock. I put the gun in the front seat and put my Bluetooth in my ear. Jack, can you hear me? I asked. Those Bluetooth pieces were finicky at best, and I didn't want to lose my only companion. Yeah, I got you. Are you sure you want to do this? Now he asks. Yeah, man, some poor lady might be getting hurt out there. It's my civic fucking duty, I said, trying not to reveal how horrified I was. I grabbed a magazine from the toolbox and started pushing in .40 caliber rounds into it. I slammed that bad boy in the pistol and pulled back the slide with an audible click. Do you have a gun? Jack asked hesitantly. You bet your sweet ass I do. I'm in Arkansas and we actually have the right to defend ourselves out here. I'm not judging you. I'm just glad you have some protection. I mean, SOP dictates that I fire you, but the situation seems to call for a gun. Thanks, Jack. A hint of a smile formed on my face as a question came to mind. Jack? Yeah. Are you in a cubicle right now? I asked, thinking of the irony of this guy wrapped in a pre-death coffin listening to me embark on an adventure, or quite possibly, my utter demise. That's really what you're gonna ask me? Not like, hey Jack, can you call the cops? Or, hey Jack, can you convince me not to walk into these scary woods towards a screaming person? Or even, why are you condoning this, Jack? He blurted out, sounding a bit exasperated. I can answer the last. I spent the last 8 years in the army. My old lady wanted me to take a desk job when we had a kid. Now, I'm stuck rotting away at the desk, hoping for a taste of, I don't know, something interesting. Honestly, I fell for the guy. I'd rather be in a temperature-controlled office building not worrying about monsters or whatever the fuck was out there. But I'd still probably die rather than make small talk with a bunch of office drones every day. So, I guess I was on the fence about who had it worse. Oh, and no, I'm actually in management. I just took over for one of my guys who's sick. So I'm not in a cubicle, you prick. I'm in an office. I have a window. Jack said triumphantly. I couldn't help but laugh a little bit. Looks like I wasn't the only one screwed by a call-out, too. The walk from my truck to the edge of the forest was less than a football field, but every step felt like a mile. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, and my stomach was turning in knots. The perspiration on my forehead started to drip down into my eyes. I made my way towards the tree line. I decided that maybe talking while I still could would alleviate some of the fear that was building up. I wiped the sweat from my eyes as I said the first thing that came to mind. So, Jack, what'd you do in the army? I heard a sigh from the other end of the phone, and then, after OCS, I went straight into training camp in civilian affairs, then airborne, then air assault, and lastly, ranger school. After 4 years, I made captain, then went to PSYOPs, and transferred to the 1st Special Forces Command. Another odd question to ask at a time like this, Bobby. The first part sounded rehearsed. You probably got asked it a lot. Yep, just trying to build up courage here. In PSYOPs, huh? Passing out flyers or doing shady shit? I asked, hoping not to sound too judgmental. With none of the lightheartedness I heard him speak with before, he stated, shady shit. In my experience with anyone, even support personnel, in Special Forces were generally negative. They were always trying to be mysterious and act like whatever they did was secretive or clandestine. In reality, there was probably some 23-year-old NSA intern with a pimpled face and thick-rimmed glasses that probably had more security clearance than any of these super soldiers. But I like Jack, and I know PSYOPs guys probably did some weird shit behind the scenes, besides yelling at the Taliban on a loudspeaker. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But I definitely did pass out my fair share of flyers my first tour with PSYOPs. Jack continued, with a hint of a laugh. You seem to know a thing about the military. You serve? Yeah, man. USMC 0311, I said with gusto. I heard Jack sigh again and state, well, if you survive, I'll buy you dinner. How about a gallon of glue? Or a box of new crayons? Sound good to you? I let out a laugh. Some of the fear stepped aside and I said lightheartedly, fuck you. Not my best comeback, but I had just reached the edge of the forest, and that humor I felt a few minutes ago disappeared, and was replaced by that stomach-knotting fear. Alright, Jack. I made it to the... Again, another ear-piercing scream came from farther out into the woods. But unlike the last time, this one didn't finish. It seemed to be cut off at the last second. It was go time. I started running full tilt into the unknown. Bobby, quit running. Whatever's out there is going to hear you coming. And besides, whoever was screaming doesn't sound like they made it, Jack said into my ear. See, that's the difference between a guy like Jack and a guy like me. I think tactically and in the short term. Jack was obviously a strategy thinker. He decided that there was no point in risking me or our chance to stop whatever was out there for someone who was probably dead. Fuck it though. Maybe the girl was hot. If she wasn't too jacked up, I don't know, maybe I'll get a blowy out of this. I don't hear you slowing down, Bobby. That's because I'm a crayon-eating Marine and I want to kick some... Another scream, followed by a, help, please, someone... The rest was cut off by another scream, followed by a vulgar tearing sound that I can only describe as a bucket of chum being dumped out onto a dry rock. The screams came from within maybe 30 yards ahead of me, but the sounds completely stopped, making everything eerily quiet. I heeded Jack's advice and slowed my sprint to a walk. I got down and started low crawling, to the point where I thought I heard the screams come from. As I inched closer, I could feel the roots making small cuts into my stomach. It was as if the whole forest floor had turned against me. But the pain subsided when I smelled something familiar. Rusted copper. Blood. I saw a large tree in my path and could make out a clearing beyond its massive base. I got behind the tree and took a quick glance into the clearing, and I felt the bile build up in my throat. Vitter had his back to me while he was lifting up an axe and bringing it down on the body of a rather rotund and definitely dead woman. I guess you're never too fat to be kidnapped. Thwack, thwack, thwack. He kept bringing down the axe over and over and over again onto this lady's already decimated corpse, blood misting and squirting out of every new orifice. I also caught a glimpse of what made that splattering chum noise. About 3 feet away from her body, it looked like her stomach was torn out and all of her innards were spilled onto the ground. It was a squirmy mass of intestines, kidneys, and other organs, leaking blood and all kinds of fluids. The smell of blood, half-digested food, and shit from her punctured colon permeated through the air. It was so strong I felt like I could taste it. "Jack," I whispered as quietly as I could into the Bluetooth. "This guy just disemboweled a chick and he's chopping her to pieces." Jack didn't respond for what felt like 12 years, until I heard a quiet munching. "Sorry, didn't catch that. Got bored waiting and went to grab a snack. Snickers really do help the hunger pangs, you know?" "Fuck, Jack. I'm out here watching some woman get butchered by a psychopath, and you're eating a Snickers?" I whispered, trying to keep Vitter unaware of my presence. "Sure, Bobby. You weren't saying much and I needed a snack. You're still alive, so nothing too crazy happened," Jack stated matter-of-factly, avoiding the topic of the horror show in front of me. He continued, "Also, I think I'm onto something. I did some research while you were fucking around in the woods, and I think I may know what you're dealing with. But you're not gonna like it, brother." I was getting impatient, trying not to retaste my Egg McMuffin, so I said as quietly as I could while expressing my annoyance, "What? Just tell me. I doubt I could be more creeped out than I already am." Well, between the tree, the mounds, and Mr. Tall, Dark, and Terrifying, I think you're dealing with some kind of evil Danish god of the forest. Jack said all of this without a hint of humor. "What the fuck are you talking about?" I asked incredulously, and possibly a bit too loudly because Vitter suddenly stopped hacking. Oh shit, this is it. This is how I fucking die, I thought. But the footsteps of sudden death never came, and the hacking resumed. Jack then spoke up. "That was close. So, anywho, I'll explain what I found. I went onto some sort of occult Google. Never seen the search engine before, but basically you type in a description of a monster or whatever shit you're dealing with, and it tells you what it is. And I'm pretty positive from what you've told me that you're dealing with a Danish forest god who happens to be some kind of evil prick. Like, super evil. He requires 1,000 corpses to build his army of humanoid tree monsters. So, for example, if you were to dig up those little mounds that you saw, you'd probably be finding fingers, toes, and ears and other human parts used as seeds to grow as forest friends. As Jack was peeking, I poked at the mound under my foot. As I did, I loosened a pile of dirt to reveal a human ear. Or tongue or something. I don't fucking know. I'm not a doctor. Jack continued. "Next up is what he looks like. See, his body isn't a tree per se, but it's a tree with a face, screaming his commands and looking to the heavens. Oh yeah, there's severed heads on the tips of the branches, and blood that sprouts out to help his trees grow. Any of this sound familiar?" Jack stated, almost sounding amused. Sick fuck, I thought. Out loud I whispered, "So Vitter is some sort of nut serial killer trying to complete his masterpiece of a god that he worships?" After asking, I took another peek beyond the tree, and I saw Vitter bent over and picking up the lady's head. He then walked around to the other side of the clearing. He then pulled out a massive ladder while balancing the blood-soaked head under his arm. Every time I looked out from my little cover, there seemed to be more and more blood. I would say it was just from the chick's body being cut open, but it seemed as if the whole clearing were covered with fresh, undisturbed pools of blood. That's when I realized that I was hidden behind the wrong fucking tree. I looked up and I saw the backs of several hundred heads. If I didn't see the painting, I would have thought that they were just coconuts. But I knew better. And as if to solidify what I was seeing was real, a huge glob of blood spewed from one of the heads and landed in the clearing with an audible splat. So here I was, in the middle of the Ozarks, up against some kind of effigy of a forgotten god, with some psycho no more than 15 feet away from me lugging around a head. This was within the top 5 worst positions I have ever been in. Jack then spoke up on the headset. So, hey, here's something else in case your day wasn't already ruined. Burstuck, that's the god by the way, has some kind of sidekick that he grants immortality to for their service. The servant being described as of great height, little girth, with eyes as black as coal. That kinda describes Vitter, right? I swear Jack almost sounded excited about all this. I took a quick glimpse into the clearing. Vitter was failing at his balancing act and trying with great intensity to grasp both the ladder and the head. I took this moment of distraction and slowly made my way back to where I came. And I tried to find a safer vantage point. Jack, I made it about 20 yards back. Can you do me a favor and call the cops? I don't think I can do much more for that lady, I whispered, still trying to stay quiet. Yeah, just gonna go ahead and ruin your day a little bit more. I tried them about 5 times. Each time I try reaching the town you're in, the call goes dead. I tried the police out here in Manhattan to see if they could do anything. They laughed and told me they couldn't do much for someone in the middle of the Ozarks. I think you may be on your own. Well, except for me, buddy. If it's any consolation, and you do get killed by some crazy devil worshipper or his pet tree god, I'll avenge you. Okay, Jack was either the calmest motherfucker on the planet, or he was truly enjoying this. So what the hell should I do, Jack? And why the fuck are you so calm? Jack took a deep breath and spoke calmly, almost coldly. Put 2 rounds in his chest and 1 in the head. I highly doubt this or his tree god are actually anything supernatural. Just a nut job obsessed with Danish folklore. And to answer your question, I spent a large amount of time fighting some of the most violent, despicable terrorists on this planet. And to answer your question, some lady getting her guts spilled out by a skinny weirdo serial killer cutting people's heads off isn't too far from the shit I've already seen. Damn, this dude is hard, I thought. Probably the best dispatcher I could have had today. I asked, okay, but what if they are, supernatural? Again, in that cold voice, Jack spoke up. Per the article on these guys, you'll need to set aflame the old god Burstuck, and his servant will be mortal again. So set Burstuck on fire before he comes alive, and shoot Vader. Easy peasy. Damn, I bet this gung-ho ass army man wouldn't be so tough if he was here facing this alone. But he sounds confident enough, so I gotta have some faith, I thought. I closed my eyes and went back to my new cover. You gonna do this, kid? Just go up there, tell him to freeze, and put a few rounds in him. And when the cops finally show up, say he charged you. Oh, yeah, and I should mention, this call isn't being monitored, and you probably shouldn't mention part of this conversation happening, Jack said. Okay, I'm ready to put this asshole down and get the hell out of here, I said, hoping I sounded less terrified than I was. You got this, buddy, Jack said, trying to motivate me. As I started back towards the clearing with this nightmarish theme of rotting pile of innards as quickly as I could, as I got closer, I could see Vitter on his ladder fumbling with the head at the top of a branch. If it wasn't so horrifying to look at, you would think he was just an ordinary guy putzing around his backyard, not a psychopath burying and hanging parts of a desecrated corpse. I gathered up what nerves I could and bellowed, "Hey, dickbag!" Vader turned around towards me as I snuck up behind him. "Get down off the ladder, slowly. Once you hit the ground, turn around and put your hands up." I felt and sounded like some kind of testosterone-fueled cop. It was almost cool being a testosterone-fueled Marine, but instead of listening to me, Vader hopped down off the top rung of the ladder and turned to face me. With a devilish sneer, he said, "Is my TV ready, cable boy?" He laughed at my confused look. "What do you think, I should fear you and your mortal weapons?" As he was speaking, he started toward the axe I was resting between us. "Lord Burstuck granted me the gift of an unending life, as long as I facilitate his rebirth in our world, and assisted him in becoming the ruler of the forest once more." He was no less than 5 feet of the axe when I yelled, "I'm warning you, nutjob. Do not take one more step. I will fucking spray your goddamn tree puppet with your fucking brain matter." In my ear, Jack shouted, "Nice line, where'd you hear that? A movie?" Ignoring the psycho in my ear canal and keeping focused on the psycho who was reaching for an axe in front of me, I took a few steps back to avoid any axe swinging if Vader did reach for it. "You are a fool, boy. I have been rebuilding the Garden of Burstuk for over a century. Many mortals have tried to stop me, but their bodies and their glorious lives' blood now belong to my lord. And soon Burstuk's revival will be completed. But you will never bask in the glory of my lord, for I shall bring down his justice and let his children bathe in your blood." As he said this, he charged forward, reaching for the axe. I warned him not to move, but he made his choice. Bang, bang, bang. I felt the welcoming feeling of the gun recoiling in my hands. The vibration had set up my arms. My aim was a bit off, though, but all 3 rounds found a home. The first 2 ripped into his stomach, filling his already stinking clearing with the smell of rotted meat and fecal stew. The third snapped his head back as it buried its way between those black-as-night eyes, fulfilling my promise with his precious tree being splattered with his brain matter and skull fragments. Vitter crumpled into a heap on the ground, adjacent to the leftover pieces of the girl he had been butchering earlier. I heard a crackling on the Bluetooth. "Is he dead?" Jack asked with that cold voice he donned when he was talking about taking lives and stacking bodies. I was pretty sure, but I started walking over to make certain I'd be facing manslaughter charges in my near future. I was a foot away when Vitter's hand bolted out and grabbed my ankle. Pain shot up my leg, his grip like a bear trap. Bang, bang! I put 2 more rounds in his skull, which caused his skull once again to violently jerk backwards, smashing into the ground, but his fucking hand stood strong. I reached down and grabbed the axe and took a powerful downward swing, severing his bony appendage and releasing the pressure on my ankle. I don't know if it was the adrenaline or the fear, but one thing I finally noticed was that he wasn't bleeding. 5 bullets in a detached hand and barely any blood. Just a small trickle around the axe wound. I swore I saw brain and skull fly out when I popped him in the head. Jack, he isn't fucking bleeding. I put 5 fucking rounds in this asshole and just chopped off his hands. In just a few drops, I said desperately, trying to express my confusion. Alright, hold on. From what I can read, the servant will drain all of his blood to feed the other parts of Burstuk's development, Jack said, finally with a hint of worry in his voice. Bobby, I think this might be the real thing. As Jack spoke that last word, Vitter's eyes turned towards me as the holes in his face healed themselves. He let out a guttural laugh and roared, "I have already proclaimed. I have been given the gift of immortality by the great Lord Burstuk. No corporeal weapons can scathe me." If you heard him, he stays down for a minute. Do something and get the fuck out of there, Jack yelled through the headset. And he was right. I picked up the axe before Vitter could make a move and brought it down onto his skull, splitting it almost clean in half. I saw whatever was left of his brain matter spill out onto the forest floor. No way he's getting up from that anytime soon, I said into the mic. I cut that fucker's head clean in half. Still admiring your morbid handiwork? Why don't you get the fuck out of there, Jack yelled in my ear. He was right. I started to book it through the woods, hopefully towards my truck, in the large can of gasoline I keep in the bed. Even though I was at almost 200 yards away from my truck, my swollen ankle kept me from getting there quickly. Vitter was probably already healed up and fixing to feed me to his tree. Luckily, I had Jack there to help me keep my shit together as I made my way to my waiting Ram 1500. I made my way to the yard. I went around the side with the painting and made sure to give Burstuk the bird and said, "I'm gonna burn you down, motherfucker. You and all your little tree babies. Oh, and your servant Vitter. I'm gonna gut him slowly. Just you wait, bitch." Are you talking to a painting, Bobby? Jack chirped in my ear. You may need some therapy when all this is said and done. Way ahead of you. Apparently, I have PTSD, I responded. Don't we all? Jack said with a bit of humor in his voice. While we were talking, I made it back to the Ram and sorted through all my junk to get the gas can. Found it, I said triumphantly. And my lucky lighter is on the dash, Jack. I may not die today. You should set your standards a little bit higher. But let's hold off from celebrating until you ice the tree monster and his sidekick. Heard? Jack asked. Heard, I responded, slightly annoyed that he wouldn't let me have at least a second to chill. But then I grinned to myself as I pulled up the Naked Woman lighter that I had had since I was 18. It was the last birthday gift I got from my pops. Yeah, he was the kind of guy to get his son a tit-covered lighter with nipples that glowed in the dark. I loved my dad. Alright, Jack, I'm taking the long walk back. Hopefully, I don't run into Vitter. If you do, just put a few more bullets in him and keep moving, Jack said, back with that frigid voice of his. I started my way back towards that god-awful scene in the woods, doing my best to remain quiet and unseen. The pain in my ankle subsided, or my mind gave up on trying to tell me to lay off it for a while, so I was able to move a little bit quicker. My ultimate goal was to get back there and find Vitter still split open like a piñata. I made it about 10 feet out when I saw a familiar semi-nude man standing in the clearing, almost as if he was waiting for me. I guess no luck with him still spilling his guts out on the dirt. Jack, fuckface is standing again. I'm gonna pop a few more rounds in him. Maybe hack off a foot. Don't waste any time, man. Who knows how close Burstook is to coming back? Put a round in Vitter's skull and set that fucking tree on fire, Jack commanded. He was right. I charged forward before Vitter could react. I placed another round between his shit little eyes. He crumpled to the ground. Just for shits and giggles, I grabbed the axe and swung it right down on his skull. I turned around to face that nightmare of a tree, and tried to figure out how to go about burning down this monster. Bobby, from what I can tell, all you gotta do is set fire to the trunk. That should take care of it, Jack instructed from the headset. Also, there's something in the article that you should probably hear. Do not speak to the old god, because he can and will bend you to his purpose. So, don't talk to the tree. Great, I'm gonna get Jedi mind-fucked by some talking tree. I can't wait to tell my shrink. That's when I first saw the thing's face. It was like the painting, but more expressive. Angrier. I started to pour gas on the tree trunk, which added another wonderful smell to this already shit and death-filled clearing. As I poured the gas onto Burstook, he decided that he was going to speak up.
Hello, Robert.
His voice sounded like Barry White after a bout of laryngitis.
Why do you attack me? Why have you harmed my faithful servant? We mean you no harm. All we want to do is bless you with my glory.
I looked at the old god's face while he was talking, but not once did his mouth move. It was as if he was speaking in my mind. Don't talk to him, Bobby. Just light him up and go home, I thought. Then the voice spoke up again.
Robert, you have accomplished nothing since leaving your warrior class. I can grant you immortality and a life of bliss. New women every day, your coffers filled with limitless gold, and power over all other men. Take my root and drink deeply from my life's blood, and all of your desires will be fulfilled.
He said this as a spigot formed on his trunk, directly in front of my face. Jack, the tree is talking to me, I mumbled. Don't listen, Bobby, Jack yelled from the headset. He's distracting you. He doesn't need 2 slaves. Think about it. As Jack was yelling, I felt myself drawn to the spigot-shaped root that was now coming from Burstook's body. Fight it, Bobby. Don't be a goddamn window licker. For some reason, being accused of window licking pulled me back to reality. And it was almost too late. Vitter was sneaking up behind me with the same axe that I split his skull with twice. At the last second, I dodged his swing by jumping backwards into Burstook. As I felt the axe swipe past my face, I dodged the attack and dropped my lighter into a tangled root of Burstook. I was able to lift up my .40 and pull the trigger 4 times. But only 3 rounds came out of the barrel. The last one jammed in the chamber. I watched as one of the bullets struck right where his heart should have been. But Vitter didn't even go down. He stumbled slightly and moved closer, laughing maniacally the whole time. Fool. Burstook is close to being completed. His powers have fueled me to unprecedented strengths. Now be still. I will end this quickly, Vitter proclaimed. Okay. Just do me a favor and answer 2 questions, and I won't fight anymore, I said in my most defeated voice. Vitter seemed to ignore my request until...
Let him speak, faithful servant.
Burstook boomed.
His weapon has ceased to be useful, and it can do us no harm. His begging for life will amuse me.
In my ear I heard, "What are you doing? Run! He can't be that fast," Jack begged. Ignoring Jack, I got onto my knees and discreetly grabbed my lighter while feigning an injury. Dying on your knees. How pathetic, Vitter mocked. Ask your question and be done with it. I looked Vitter dead in his eyes and said, Why would you let me distract you? As I asked Vitter the question, I hit the starter on Pop's lighter and dove forward. I felt my ass being scorched by the burning gasoline fumes. An unholy scream erupted in my head, causing my ears to ache and my head to spin.
I will tear you limb from limb. I will come back and take your head as my first...
Burstook couldn't finish his sentence, because the flames had reached his face. I saw the bark that was his flesh charred and burned. The whole time he was screaming in my head. I was able to shake off the shock and turn my attention back to Vitter. Hopefully, he was no longer immortal. He just stood there, staring at his master with tears welling up in his eyes. How could you have done this? You could have been part of the great Lord Burstook. You have slain him, Vitter cried. My last act as a servant will be to avenge him and take the life of... Before I could let this asshole finish his sentence, I unjammed my Glock and shot him in the stomach, just so I would get the chance to watch him die slowly. I looked down at Vitter, and it seemed that the spell or whatever had started to wear off, because he looked like he was in pain. His intestines were spilling out of the gaping wound in his gut, and I finally saw the right goddamn amount of blood starting to pool in the dirt. In a weak voice he said, My whole life, in servitude to my lord, and ended by a low man, a servant. As he spoke, I saw blood trickle out of the side of his mouth. I guess a bullet fragment ended up in his lungs. I felt now was the right time to ask my last question. Oh yeah, before I forget and before you die, why the fuck did you want satellite TV? I asked, hoping I would find out why I was out here in the first place. Vitter smiled a bloody, disturbing smile. He looked me in the eyes and said softly, I missed the view. Raven Simone is a hoot. I thought my opinion of this pathetic little shit couldn't get any lower. But when he said the view was the reason my ass was out here, I emptied the rest of my magazine into his skull, spraying his fucking brains, for the last time, onto the forest floor. Jack, it's over. The tree is burning up and Vitter emptied his insides on the ground. If it wasn't for you, buddy, I would have never made it. I owe you a drink, brother, I said. So, an ancient deity and his undying sycophant killed by an out-of-shape marine turned into a cable technician. Who the hell would have thought that? Jack said. I'm glad you're okay, buddy. Looks like the local PD have finally noticed. They gave me a holler on the other line, and the fucking chief gave me a serious tongue lashing, yelling about the crazy nut blasting off rounds in the wood. Fuck. I'm about 85% positive I just saved the world, and I'm probably going to be arrested for murder, I complained. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I'll probably get popped for helping your ass out. So, you want to be prison roomies? Jack asked with a hint of humor. I grunted in response as I heard the distant sirens. Ah well. At least I won't have to install fucking cable anymore. Guys, I hope you enjoyed that one. I felt like putting in a little bit of extra work and dropping a big wet turd in your sub box. So, it is time to thank the patrons. Let's start off with Dan R, Paul Z, Cody V, Chaos X, Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, JY, Pyromancer, Hayden MH, Ethan A, Dark Side of the Bear, Daniel H, and Maximilian Charles P. Since the CPM on this channel has been slashed, like fucking crazily, it went from like $7.50 down to $3. I would appreciate it if you did become a patron. There's Patreon-only stories. I just put out a pretty fucked up one with a little help from Spirit Voices the other day. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for listening, watching, liking, sharing, and supporting. I appreciate it.
Because if you don't, Burstook will fuck your dead body.